Alright, back at it on the felt, this time at a new spot called Ace and Vine in Napa, California. This location opened earlier this year in February, and just from my initial impressions, it seems like a great food and entertainment addition to wine country. The gaming area, although small and intimate, with just a few table games and 2 poker tables, is very well put together and has a nice overall vibe. The poker game available tonight is 2-3 no limit with a $500 max buy-in, but you are allowed to match the biggest stack. You can also straddle up to half your stack from any position. In the first hand that I'm dealt, I unfortunately don't yet have the camera ready, but with an under the gun straddle, I'm first to act with ace-3 of clubs and a raise of 20. Button and big blind call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of king 7-7 with a couple of clubs, so I flop a nut flush draw. Big blind checks, and I'm still getting situated with my chips as I decide to check. Button bets 40, big blind folds, and I proceed with a call. 4th street comes the queen of spades, I check, and the button checks back. River rolls off the deuce of clubs, so I get there, and with about 150 in the pot, I settle on a bet of roughly 2/3 and put out 110, targeting what feels like a king. And after a bit of thinking, button puts in the call. I table my hand, and it's good. Shortly after, it folds to me in the cutoff with deuce 3 of diamonds and a raise to 12. Button in the blinds call, and we go 4 ways to a flop of ace 10-5 with a couple of diamonds, giving me a flush draw and a gutter. The blinds check, I see bet 25, button and small blind fold, and the big blind calls. Heads up to a turn of a queen of hearts, so I still have the nut low. When big blind checks, I'm just going to keep firing since I can represent a variety of strong holdings on this board. I put out 80. Big blind doesn't think too long and lets it go. Take this one down with the Air Jordan. After about 15 to 20 minutes of play, I've increased my stack from 500 to 800, but with some bigger stacks at the table and the table match option, I decided to add on for 500. We then play a $20 bomb pot, and I'm on the button with the ace of clubs and the 8 of clubs. 9 ways to a flop of queen 10-7 rainbow, and surprisingly, it gets checked through. Turn up the jack of diamonds, putting up a diamond draw and giving me a 2-way straight draw. Checks to the low jack who bets 40, and after it folds me on the button, I'm feeling frisky, particularly because my opponent is wearing a Dodgers cap, and I don't want to let this hand end without taking a swing like that last Giants game. I raised to 175. When it comes to bomb pots, I do think bluffing should be done sparingly and with caution, but this seems like a decent spot to give it a try. Since most opponents have shown disinterest, I have card removal to strong hands, and low jack could be full of it himself, perhaps betting just a naked diamond draw. It folds back around to the low jack who ends up tank calling, and we go to a river of a jack of spades. So I brick out. Low jack thinks a bit before checking, and although I could run into jack 9 and king jack, I'm probably not going to win this hand via showdown, so I just got to continue representing as though I had 2 pair of better on the turn, and I announce a bet of 300. I fade the snap call, so that's good, and after a bit of deliberation, low jack ends up putting in the fold.
We got a new follower.
Hand immediately after, under the gun +1 limps. The main opponent from the previous hand raises to 20 from middle position. I've got ace king offsuit in the cutoff and 3 bet to 75. Folds back to middle position who calls, and we go heads up to a flop of queen 8 deuce, all different suits. Middle position checks, and I decide not to c-bet this one, and don't really have a good reason why. 4th street comes a 9 of hearts, and middle position leads for 80. Not a great spot to continue. I fold. In the next shuffle once again, there's an under the gun straddle to 10, and I raise to 35 from the hijack with the hand that Asians love, pocket 8s. Only the small blind calls, and the flop comes ace high with a heart draw, and an 8, so I flop bottom set on a draw heavy board. Small blind checks, and there's a good reason to bet this time, and I fire 45, and unfortunately get a fold. A short while later, I raise a 12 from the hijack with ace jack offsuit. Cutoff calls, and button attempts to put in a 3 bet to 45, but gets called for a string bet, so it's just a call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 9-8-7 rainbow. I check, cutoff checks, and button who wanted to 3 bet pre also checks. 4th street comes a 4 of diamonds, and I consider leading since I hold the jack of diamonds, but decide against it and check. Cutoff puts out a bet, button folds, and I just get away as well. Cutoff ends up tailing jack 10 offsuit for the nuts. In this next hand, under the gun and cutoff limp, button raises to 25, and I've got pocket queens in the small blind and 3 bet to 80. Big blind who is a friend of a friend puts in a 4 bet to 300 with 198 back. Folds back to me, and it doesn't feel like a great situation. On one hand, it feels like the worst hand that I'm up against is ace king. On the other hand, my opponent does go by the name Sneaky Pete, and that alone leaves the door open for suspicious activity. All that in mind, I want to see some community cards and put in the call, and the flop comes 10-8-5. I check, My opponent rips for 198. Not gonna get away, so I put in the chips and my opponent shows pocket kings. I turn my hand over as well and look to drill the turn or river, which comes the 6 of hearts and the ace of diamonds. Sneaky Pete locks up a double up. In the next shuffle, low jack raises to 20, cut off flats, and I've got king queen off on the button. I was planning to just flat had it folded to me since I don't want it to look like I'm steaming, but since there is a caller in between, I like a squeeze. I make it 80, low jack calls, and the cutoff folds. Heads up to a flop of 994 with a hard draw. Low jack checks and I follow through with a down C bet of 60. Low jack calls, and the turn comes a king of hearts, completing the front door flush and also giving me 2 pair. Low jack checks and I consider checking back and then firing non-heart rivers, but I decide to bet 150, primarily targeting pocket pairs, and he pretty quickly lets it go. In the next interesting hand, Matt in under the gun +1, who is also a friend of a friend, raises to 25. Middle position calls, and I just flat from the big blind with a strong holding, ace queen of diamonds. 3 ways to a flop of ace king deuce rainbow. I check, under the gun +1 C bets 50, middle position folds, I call. Turn comes a 9 of spades, putting up a backdoor flush draw. I check again, and Matt continues the aggression for 100. He's repping pretty strong, but with my exact hand, it's tough to get away without any prior history with this opponent. I put in calling chips, and fifth street comes the 6 of spades. I check, and he does not let up and bets 200. While I don't expect to win at a high frequency in this type of spot, I'm also a calling station, and I put in the 200, and he tables Jack 10 offsuit for the bluff. I quite honestly did not expect to see that hand, but happy to take this one down. Next spot I raise a 12 from under the gun with a suited 1 gapper, button and big blind call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 8-8-6 with a couple of spades, so I flop hard with an open-ended straight flush draw. Big blind checks, I see bet 20, and button raises to 75. Big blind folds, and a somewhat interesting decision point here. It's possible that he's fast playing an 8, or he has a 6 and is raising to deny equity, or he could potentially have a better flush draw. I decide to just call and evaluate the turn, which comes to 7 of hearts, so I pick up showdown. I check, and he puts out a bet of 150. Not going to overthink this situation, I just flat, and the river comes, the 5 of diamonds, so I make a straight. I check once again, and this time he bets 300. Can I raise for value? I think it's close. Having the 7 is nice since I block some full houses. He shouldn't really have 5-8, so his full houses should just be the few combos of 6-8 suited and pocket 6s. That said, when he raised the flop and continued the aggression on the turn, I actually didn't give him credit for an 8. The interesting part about my hand though is that this is probably one of the stronger holdings that I'll have in this spot, and for that reason I could find some value raises to offset the times I may raise the river with spades that missed. Long story short though, I just call, and he tables queen 8 offsuit, so I read the situation completely wrong and potentially missed out on river value, but I do scoop a decent pot. Last hand to run through, there are 2 limps and I raise to 20 from the hijack with king queen offsuit. Cut off and the 2 limpers call, and we go 4 ways to a flop of king jack 9 with a spade draw. Checks to me, I see bet 50, cut off who is sneaky Pete from the earlier hand calls, and the 2 limpers fold. Heads up to a turn of a 5 of hearts, so a good blank. I continue for 130, targeting a variety of inferior holdings, and while Pete is in the tank, I get the sense that I'm up against a jack and would like a call, but he ends up being disciplined and releases his hand.
Ace jack's a good fold.
Thank you, buddy. Sick to hear where I am.
That's going to do it for the hands, but as I mentioned in the last video, I'll be co-hosting a meetup game with Doug McCusker on Wednesday, November 10th. We'll be playing 3-3 no limit with a buy-in of 100 to 500. The start time is 3 p.m. And Doug and I are actually working with Lucky Chances on some giveaways for the first handful of people that show up. To sign up in advance, please visit projectlock.com. There will be an event link to sign up that I've also included in the description box below. And yeah, definitely look forward to mixing it up with some of you. All right, just wrapped up the session here at Ace and Vine in Napa. First time visiting this property and nothing but positive things to say. The staff is great. Got to meet Mina, Alan, and Noom, all of which are really great people. All the dealers were super on point. Food was solid, and the property was just super nice. And as for the poker results, I played 2-3 no limit, was originally in for 500, but it was a match the stack, and stacks were getting pretty deep, so I did add 500. So I bought in for 1,000 and ended up cashing out 2,060. So book a win of 1,060. Pretty happy with that, and we'll definitely be back to this property. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.